Thank you, folks. We've got a sizable group right now. The next process is going to be a lot of fun because this is where you get to ask your burning question to the person in the hot seat. The process will be just come up if we can get a line of that works. I'm not the only hot air here. So if you come on up, you'll ask your question, and here's our expert panel.
People go home.
Now it's not. Why, you have to be close.
Here we go.
There we go.
Okay, I probably really don't need this, but anyway, I hear the term a lot, in-stream flow. What's the definition of in-stream flow?
Well, that sounds like a legal question.
Yeah.
In-stream flow could have more than one definition, but in the state statutes, it's defined as a minimum base flow to protect values such as recreational, aesthetics, fish and wildlife habitat, and it's said to be a base flow necessary to protect those values, and that's called the minimum in-stream flow, and it's defined in a couple different places in the state law.
Now, how about a body of water, and I'm thinking specifically of a 35 to 40 acre lake that doesn't flow into any other body of water, whether it's a stream or other lake or anything?
So minimum in-stream flows usually refers to streams, but to the extent it refers to lakes, I'm not really sure how to answer the question. I'm going to have to pass on that one.
That's a good question, and maybe you look it up for us and we'll give it to Larry so we'll make it available to you folks. More questions for our panel? You're all here waiting for something. Here we go.
This is about WIDs. WID, excuse me. Some questions from the Bertrand Creek Watershed Improvement District, and these are from, it's 2003. And the Director of Ecology was to have made an investigation and reported the findings before the hearing for the RCW 87.03.020. And in that investigation was supposed to be the sufficiency of the source and supply of water for the purpose of the proposed district, and file a report of his findings with the county commissioners at or prior to the hearing. Does anybody ever seen these?
Is there anybody knowledgeable about the Bertrand Watershed Improvement District? I'm seeing no takers on that question.
Thank you.
You're getting off that here.
I just wanted to make the comment, you know, there's thousands of water right applications that have just practically been ignored for 20 years. If they would have been given to people 20 years ago, they would have established some kind of water right seniority. But since nobody's gotten a thing, when they do get issued, it'll be totally junior, right? Am I wrong in that, or is that's the way I interpret the law?
The water right priority is as of the date of the application, but of course it's no good unless you get it.
Right. So if we eventually get it, we will get that clear back to the date.
Right.
Any more questions from the audience? Let me ask.
Wes has got a lot to go over. I know you won't see us.
I have a question on buffers, and one of the things that I've found over the years that a grass buffer works just as effectively for filtering fecal coliforms or sediment or anything else out as does tree-lined or native brush type habitat. And it bothers me with the CREP program where they plant all these trees and they come back and talk about the fecal coliform and the water going up, and actually when we put all these nice trees along the stream, it's beautiful habitat for skunks and raccoons and possums and deer, and many other things, and I think a lot of that's contributing that it gets overlooked when we talk about that. So you might want to address that a little bit. Some of you, I don't know who, anybody.
So the issue is regarding to water quality and some of the practices that are attendant to that?
Well, I can give you a terrible answer. No, it's not a terrible answer, but I want to address the part of the question in which you identified different sources of fecal coliform, where, you know, skunks and geese and stuff like that. There are tests that can be done on fecal coliforms, on samples, to determine what kinds of fecal DNA are in the samples. However, it doesn't determine concentrations, as I understand it. I'm not the biologist at Resources, but that's what I understand, is it doesn't determine concentrations. So, you know, the thing about dealing with fecal coliform is that we can only deal with the things that we can deal with. You know, we can deal with known sources of fecal coliform, cows getting too close to streams, septic systems, whatever. You know, whatever we can identify that this is too close, this is leaking, whatever. We can deal with those things. We can't go out there and shoo away all the skunks. So I guess what I'm saying is that we're trying to deal with the issues that we can identify. And once we deal with all those, and if we still have high fecal coliform levels, then we'll have to address some of those other things you're talking about too. But Mark is the buffer guy.
Oh, here we go.
Well, no, all I'll say is, Wes, you just got appointed to the Citizens Advisory Committee for the Critical Areas Ordinance Update, so that's really the best place for that question to be answered, and so I wrote it down. So, but that's something we can look at through the best available science, see if there's any research on grass filter strip buffers versus treed buffers, as you know, in terms of the function of fecal coliform inputs. It's a good question.
The buffer question has been addressed in numerous research trials, been looked at numerous ways. There's a number of different comparisons between different types of soils or watersheds, but the main thing that carries bacteria is the runoff. So getting the bacteria into the soil, whichever way, shape, or form, so that it can be treated either by uptake by other bacteria that eat them or killed by sunlight, is the way to treat fecal coliform in an agricultural setting. The buffer question comes back to setbacks. Are we calling it a setback or a buffer or riparian buffer? And there's different practices or ways to plant that, but the bacteria that are out there from manure that are fecal coliform, E. coli, the ones that we're concerned with, are being tested. The question is, are we getting the right sampling procedure? Are we seeing those right numbers come through? When we see a huge number this time of year, 50,000 on the watershed, there's things going on and everyone automatically goes straight to what's happening in the watershed. The question is, there's a lot of rain we had this last week that did affect in a number of different sources that are happening right now. So identifying those things piece by piece is a part of it, but the question is, there's still applications of manure, there's still failing septic systems, there's still ducks nesting right now on their in those waterways. So there are a number of sources. The DNA sampling that has been conducted both in the Samish, and I helped with one study in Drayton Harbor, it showed that the DNA came back as like 30% of each, wildlife, human, and bovine. In the Samish example, they showed that the DNA coming off the sewer treatment plant at Edison was showing up as a bovine marker. They showed dog manure that they tested directly had bovine markers in it for DNA. The question on a duck field, in a grain field in a duck pond, they found bovine markers. So the question is, if you're going to be looking at DNA specifically, those duck could have came from a manure pond, landed in that duck pond, that dog running around the field could have ate cow manure, and people walking home or working at a dairy washing their clothes in the city of Edison would come out as a bovine marker. That being said, there is bovine sources, and we know that we can do better operating our farms to make sure that that doesn't happen, but no one's perfect. And so a zero tolerance is perfection. So we need to understand where we can go and how do we protect the water for public health and be reasonable to keep our farms here.
Thank you. So questions are, when we're adopting best available science, we want to make sure our solutions are not working cross purposes. Now, we had another question. Please get in
Right,
line.
the question I have is, does the issuance of a drilling permit for a well constitute a water right?
No, it's just a drilling permit. An application, again, establishes the priority date. A water right is established through a permit, which is then perfected through use and established through a certificate. It's also possible to have claims that predate the surface water code and groundwater code. So claims, permits, certificates are water rights.
Hello. My question was along with the fecal coliform issue and trying to tease out, what the factors are. How do you determine like how much comes from Canada, Canadian sources? I mean, that's another issue. And in addition to that, another question. I mean, you say you want to be fair about this and not over penalize people for, sources that they have no control over. But I think a really good example of where those policies exist, where you do over penalize people who maybe contribute not the most to damage, is around Lake Whatcom, where like with people with phosphorus, the homeowners around Lake Whatcom, seems to me that they get whammied for a lot of stuff, even sources that they really don't have control over, that they bear the burden. And I don't know how you assure that policies you create to control things like fecal coliform don't concentrate on a few people who are low-hanging fruit, so to speak.
So again, the question comes to a basic fairness, that if we're all contributing and we need to solve the problem, how do we get everybody who's contributing to step up to the plate?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't have the answer to that. I mean, I think it goes to fairness, right? I think that's the heart of what you're asking about. And to my mind, it means it's an obligation on, certainly on local government. If we're going to enact a regulation or a policy or a strategy to combat that, then it's incumbent on us to have the science, the research on our side to document it. And that's why I think that's so important, and that we sometimes don't do. We do make a reach sometimes because we kind of think that's the best thing to do, or that's what our values tell us, but we may not have the science behind us. So I think the more we do of that fundamental research, I know it's boring, but I think ultimately leads to fair, more equitable strategies in how we deal with these problems.
Did you have something to say? Okay, well, I want to talk about the 10 Mile Creek example, since 8 minutes is now not nearly enough time to talk about everything I wanted to talk about. I've worked as a planner, I've written regulations that are on the books right now. I'm a fan of a fair approach, and I'm a fan of voluntary solutions where we can get them. And I think that the model that we're using in the 10 Mile Creek watershed is a really good one. The folks that are on that committee are from a broad range of political spectrums. We have, and they're all from that community. And what they're doing is they're going out with our scientists on sampling runs. They're trained to do sampling. And if you look at I have a handout at the back that describes the 10 Mile Creek project. On the back side is some of our sampling data, and I am not the specialist who can explain those numbers to you. But I will tell you that people from the committee have been out on all of those sampling runs in one shape or form, and they are looking at that data, and they're looking at the places where that data is collected, and then they're going, oh right, this is a high number, this is higher than last time, what changed? And then they're looking upstream to figure out what it is that's causing that. And then they're going, these committee members who are residents of that community are going to their neighbors and saying, hey, we just took these samples and it's looking rough. It looks like we've got some problems. Hey, let's look at what you got going on your property. And people are way more receptive when it's a neighbor to neighbor experience like that than when it is the hammer of government coming down and saying you're screwing this up. The other thing I want to add is some of those sampling sites that we have are on private property, and we've been told that we can sample there. So, and those aren't reported on the sheet. Yeah.
I guess my concern was, how do you deal with things that aren't under your control, like say Canadian sources?
Let me address that real quickly. As people aren't aware, there is water quality monitoring pretty extensive. We do share watersheds with the Canadians. The Bertrand fish trap comes south, the Sumas goes north, and so there's a trading of water quality. There is monitoring that goes on at the border by the Washington Department of Ecology in Whatcom County, and they have been alerting their Canadian contemporaries about those high exceedances, trying to recruit their participation. But that goes to the basic premise is if we all do what we can do, we'll be more successful. Next question, please.
Well, I guess I have a question. And this is my always question, so I don't see anybody else in line. Are you guys lined up? Yes. Well, I'll wait. You gotta come up here though. They want you on camera.
Thank you very much. I'm Marion Bedell. I've been involved in this since before the beginning. I was one of the co-founders that set up and operated the planning unit back 12 or 15 years ago. We made, I am confident, a major effort to reach out to all populations, all interest groups, and bring them in to create what ended up to be about 12 citizen caucuses that sat together with the government caucuses. But I heard a statement from one of the speakers a while ago who was fussing about people who didn't get involved and didn't get a chance. And I'd like to hear an explanation for that, perhaps not now, but let's get that uncertainty, that concern out on the table if it was really happened that way. And if it still goes on today, I will stand here again and say, everybody's involved, everybody drinks water. So let's have the breadth of the involvement and the contributions maximum that we can manage. So who was it that said that they didn't get involved, didn't have a chance? Thank you.
No answer?
Rhetorical question.
No, that's a real question. It was stated and I noted it in my notes.
Was that you, Roger?
I didn't hear this.
I heard the statement.
Yes,
That gentleman there said that there was some dissatisfaction that people were left out. I'm sorry, I don't agree.
Are you talking the tribes or you?
No, I'm Roger Brown.
We're not on.
I'm Roger Brown. What I said was that the planning unit was originally constituted to be open and inclusive, and that was the way it started and the plan was developed. After the plan was approved, as the years went on, the planning unit stopped meeting entirely, did not meet for 4 years. So that's a fact. And when I say there was some discontinuity there, that is a fact. As the planning unit has started up again after a break of more than 4 years, not all of the original parties are at the table. I don't know what all the reasons for that are. We're not in a position as a Water Districts Caucus to find out. In my opinion, it's a concern for the lead agency or lead entity, which is the county itself, to look into that. Attendance is sporadic or non-existent on the part of some of the original participants. Some of them, frankly, stopped participating fully, at least while the plan was being developed. So those are choices that people made. I'm not saying they were excluded, but when the planning unit simply did not meet, that we've called that excluding participation.
So that's the qualification.
Okay, I just want to add that there's also been things going on that haven't been open in public. They haven't gone to they're supposed to come to the county council for discussion and approval. That hasn't been happening. So yeah, there's some problems.
So does that provide some clarification that he wasn't impugning the initial process of the planning unit, but rather the hiatus, the suspension, and subsequent to that time? Okay.
Is it on? From what I've heard, a lot of this has to do with Indians, their ability to fish, being able to get a good return. And I don't know how much fecal coliform is being blamed on that, or if that's strictly a health issue, but they had a record return this last year because the Asians didn't fish, you know, they kept away from that 200-mile buffer out there. So we had a record return. I don't know if they did iron seeding. I know that that's been something that's been very productive. It helps to produce the food that the salmon like. So just, all these things are great solutions. And if this issue is all about fish, then maybe we don't have a problem with water levels in the Nooksack. Maybe we have a problem with fishing outside the boundary areas and not taking care of these other issues.
Yes, I live in Everson, and the question that I have, I got my water bill here a couple days ago, and how does the city, how do they get away with charging $53 for sewer? I mean, I got just a small house, and with the sewer and the water, it's almost $75 a month. And when I first moved there, well, I had the house built. Before they had the water meter put in, I was paying $8 to $10 a month. But now, I brought the bill with me so I could show it if you want to see it. It's $75 a month for just sewer. I mean, who do you talk to complain about it?
Well, thank you very much. I think your city official is the one that you take it right up with. That would be the mayor.
Talk to Roger. He runs the sewer.
Not there, he does.
Not theirs.
Okay, which one?
I don't think anyone on your panel is going to be able to get you some satisfaction about your water
City
bill.
Hall and complain, I mean.
You've got an address on the bill. I suggest let's take a look and see where's that address and is there a phone number, and follow up with your local politicians to get that very good question answered.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Mike Martin. I read that in 2009, the state legislature gave the Walla Walla area a special arrangement where they could enhance their possibilities for banking. And it involved the things I've heard this gentleman, Chris, say, and then Matt Mayberry said the same thing at the first forum, which is there's concern about relinquishment, to use it or lose it. And they found that in Walla Walla that it's a long story, but that by surmounting that problem, they were able to actually bank water and, in fact, I'm told, improve stream flows. And I don't know if it's a successful endeavor. It sounded fairly similar, where there were tribes involved, there were ags, there were some city uses, all that. And I'm just wondering if something like that has applicability here, and whether, and I'd like just to hear about whether water banking has possibilities in our county.
Anybody familiar with the water banking and how that might have some assistance here?
I'm not extremely familiar with the water banking situation in Walla Walla. I know that they've had greater success in doing some of those things because that's an adjudicated basin, so there's quite a bit of certainty. It says it's on, okay, about who has what. We have a project proposal that I was asked to comment on tonight, didn't get time for it, that involves an interbasin transfer of groundwater that could help create two kinds of water banks, one a mitigation exchange and the other a water rights bank. And I'm not going to try to go into it. It's too big of a subject. There's an outline paper. I brought 50 of them, and if you're interested in that, you can pick that up.
So to probably tie that up in a nutshell, is it okay if lose it or use it or lose it means that folks are going to over-apply water just so they can protect a permit? That wasteful use of a limited quantity is not a good idea. And if there's mechanisms and tools like being able to park it in a bank for future use at some time without jeopardizing water rights, could be a tool available to the group, Whatcom County, to make best use of its water.
Was part of your question what Marty said too about using less water and losing the rights to water because they were using less water? Is that what you were?
As I recall, Marty said that ag alone was under this kind of hammer of relinquishment, and that for that reason they tended to use all the water they had for fear of losing it. In Walla Walla, they were able to say, we're not going to use that water, instead we're going to put it in a bank and then use it at different times of the year and provide that sort of flexibility to the ag folks.
Yeah, they may not have all heard that.
Hey, George, Greg, can I kind of do a partial response to that too? The WIRA 1 Joint Board, the Water Management Board is working on, I don't know if you guys remember the water symposium we had a couple of years ago now? Was it 2 years ago? We're working on a kind of a half day, maybe one this fall, that would focus on water banking. And so on that very topic, and they would look at, I think, the Walla Walla experience, and there was also, I think, a case over in on the Olympic Peninsula. The Dungeness River watershed had a similar kind of a deal where DOE worked with the farmers and the tribes to come up with some kind of a trading system on water. So I would keep your eyes peeled if and when we do that seminar, symposium, we'll make sure we get that adequately publicized for folks to talk about water banking.
Just briefly, that's also one of the purposes of the Trust Water Rights Program, which is a provision in state law DOE administers, where if you put water rights into that program, you're not subject to the use it or lose it. Then they can be withdrawn later in the kind of situation that you're talking about. So there are mechanisms in place, legal mechanisms to do that.
One of the things Marty was saying was that with the new drip irrigation systems in the farm, is that what you're going to talk to, Chris? Go ahead.
The consumptive use of the crops in our area are much less than the actual water rights that are listed. And so that's been the challenge of the producers to know that and to be able to use better practices to save money, to save irrigation, and not be afraid of it being taken away from them and not being able to expand that water use to other adjacent lands. And that is a huge concern for producers. That is a wise use of water, but they're afraid to push that issue.
Okay, next question.
Mark, this might be something you'd answer. I'm kind of curious. I've never heard the planning unit discuss the county water system coordinated plan. It seems to me that's a linchpin that should be before that unit. Am I wrong on that?
Yes, I do.
So the coordinated water system plan is under a separate statute than the planning unit. Planning unit is under RCW 9082 out of that Watershed Planning Act, and so they're different, distinct things. They're both related to water supply planning, but the coordinated water supply plan is a requirement of the State Department of Health, and because it's drinking water only is what it's oriented at. So there is the requirement there for the public involvement is something called the WUC, the Water Utility Coordinating Committee, I think it's called. And that's basically representatives of all the public water associations in the county. And so they get a seat at the table and they work through the planning process that way.
One of the elements of the planning unit's draft work plan is to review the existing watershed management plan, and included in that is to review something called the Lower Nooksack Strategy. And the Lower Nooksack Strategy includes as one of its elements the Coordinated Water System Plan. So it's the objective of the planning unit and understanding that we would be looking at that in some way.
One of the things I've appreciated about these forums is seeing people from rather diverse silos, I heard the word, talking together. And one of my frustrations is when I see either, like it seems like in the media, they take sides, or things happen and people say, oh, we didn't know about this. What can the public do to hold the media or to hold the bureaucracy more accountable? Okay, maybe Mark Personius or
Kate will have that.
take your pick. Is the switch?
Oh, is it? Oh, it's on now. Sorry, there's a switch. That's a tough question. You know, for me, being seen to be on one side of this issue or any issue all the time, it's tough out there in the media. It's tough right now. There's a lot of back and forth through comments and through blogs and things like that. And, you know, I don't know that it's all effective. I think that the thing that we can do as a community engaging with the media is to be positive and solution focused. Stop pointing fingers at people and stop, you know, calling each other names. Focus on solutions, focus on the future, because all of us care about Whatcom County. Every single one of us in this room cares about this community. We wouldn't live here if we didn't. And it's important that that starts showing up in the way that we talk to each other in media.
Yeah, I agree with Kate on that. And I would say, I think I mentioned it when I was first talking about, it's just something that government has to do, always has to do a better job of, is communicating with its constituents. And you know, issues, that's why these forums are so great, because these are complicated, difficult issues that are not going to easily solved, you know, with an up or down vote or easy slogans. And so they affect a lot of people differently and a lot of different interest groups. And, you know, we seem to spend half our time arguing about process, you know, just how are we going to go about solving this problem or dealing with these challenges as much as it is the technical aspects of it. So I know for local government that takes up a huge part of our time. You know, constantly getting that information out. It's frustrating for us when I'll just tell you this as an aside, and I think some people know this better than others, but you know, for example, when we're putting proposals together for the planning commission or for the county council or for the planning unit or whatever it is that you know, you try not to do it in a vacuum, but we have all sorts of advisory committees and people get to comment on all of these processes, and we have Open Public Meetings Act, and we have absolute requirements for transparency in local government, and that's nothing but a good thing. But nevertheless, sometimes you put a proposal out, and it's what we hope is an incremental step. It's the next best step or the best proposal we can come up with, and then it's like everybody, you know, you put a big target on yourself, and everybody gets to take shots at you, and that's fine. I guess that's a part of the process, but it's not very efficient, and it doesn't always result in smooth decision making as much as I'd like it to. But I'm always looking for better ways to get that, increase that feedback loop sooner rather than later, so that we incorporate people's thoughts and comments and concerns all the way along the process, so that by the time we come up with a proposal that gets to government, the decision makers, then we've pretty much got consensus, or we've got most people in agreement on this is the right thing to do.
We should form a planner support group.
I would just like to add that it's a great question, because everybody's saying something different about it. And my interpretation of the question is, how do you penetrate the bureaucracy as an individual citizen? It's really hard. If you're an outsider and you don't work for the county, or you don't work for a group that's always involved in it, or you don't work for an agency or a local government, or have clients that are always involved, how do you do that as an individual? It's a challenge. And I think just looking for the opportunities, there are opportunities to interact. I'd say the planning unit is one place that's open and public where these issues are all discussed. The council is another place where these issues can come up. Keep reading the newspaper for meetings and opportunities, and before you know it, you'll be put on a committee probably.
Everybody has something to say. One of the things we've done at Birch Bay is formed a citizens advisory committee. It was commented that this is very technically complex, demanding material, and we put together a group and tried to present them information about these watershed planning issues in pretty full detail. And we were very surprised at how they stuck with it and how they were extremely interested in it. We didn't know that going in, but they really were. And you can't get it in the newspapers. It doesn't make very good journalism, I don't think. I think it's too tough a going. So one thing government can do is that kind of thing to help out.
I recommend participating in the information gathering as well, because many of these numbers that go into the models are based off of some general number, like the 5,000 gallon exempt well number, and actually you're only using 500 gallons, so that across the county that water would have been available. And so those numbers are very important, and when modelers or scientists come from outside of the area, they do not have our information. We have a unique climate, we have different soils, and we have different population than most other areas.
Well, in the same vein of communication between people who are working in depth with water planning and those of us who are more on the outside, what I have seen in my experience is that usually when the citizen comes, they come because there is a monetary concern involved also. And I know that the dairy industry has put a lot of money into what they've done out here, but yet you hear nothing, you still don't hear any positive results. The only thing you hear is negative impacts or negative results. So at some point, I would guess those folks would say, why did I put in all this money if there's no credit being given around? That would be a natural feedback that you get. I live in the Lake Whatcom watershed. I have been to some of the meetings where they have talked about things that they want to do there. And frankly, the dollar signs are pretty big that they are talking about. And I know there are a lot of people, not just myself, that are starting to be living on very fixed incomes. And we certainly didn't plan in our retirement planning 20 years ago that the city and county was going to come off with some grand schemes that were going to cost this much money. But yet when we bring those concerns, I get the feeling that if you're just going to talk about money, then you don't want clean water. And that is very off-putting and contentious. If I'm talking about money, it's not because I don't want clean water. It's because I don't know how I'm going to be able to pay the price tag you are putting on clean water. and it's a real concern. So,
Thank you for that comment.
So Lake Whatcom is a really unusual situation in Washington State, in the nation, period. It's just unusual. I think the thing with Lake Whatcom that needs to be explored is ways to accomplish the clean water goals that we have and provide some support to the people that are bearing the brunt of having to do it. You know, and it could include, I'm going to get a boo here, but just hear me out, you know, a countywide tax or something to help fund paying for these upgrades, these necessary retrofits that have to happen in Lake Whatcom, because it's our drinking water source for more than half of Whatcom County. And, you know, but I think the solutions have to be more creative than just implementation of a regulation. We have to get more creative in the coming years, because you're right, it's expensive, and you're bearing the brunt of this need for clean water, and maybe we should all work together to make that happen.
So I just have a couple comments on that. First on the dairies. So we were talking earlier about the new ag census just came out, and I can't remember the exact number, but it's significant increase in farm gate value since in the last 5 years. So, and that includes dairy. So they're doing pretty good. So are berries. So something's working on that end to make it, you know, payable or make it worthwhile. Did costs go up? Yes, but values can go up as well. The other thing I would say is that, well, that's true. We don't, you know, I'd love it if I never had to write another regulation the rest of my life. And I would love it if we had incentive-based approaches, and that's all we did, and everybody, you know, everybody grabbed at it, and everybody did that, and everybody didn't know fecal coliform got in the water anymore. Wouldn't that be awesome? But we know that that's not going to happen, and so not everybody behaves the same way or does the same thing and at the same time. So we kind of need, from a government perspective, you need a suite of approaches to address the tools to address the particular problem best. And the last thing I want to say is an acknowledgement that you know, everybody needs to understand that change is difficult. These issues are difficult issues, and they will require change over time, and including that the cost of living is going to go up, whether you're in an urban area or a rural area. The cost of water is probably going to go up, or the cost for water mitigation is probably going to go up. So there's some things we can't do about that. Those are going to be normal market forces that are going to be results of legal decisions, and we're going to change behavior. You know, we're seeing that already with the cases in Skagit County, in the Swinomish case, that, you know, that law is going to evolve, state law is going to evolve, and therefore our law has to evolve. So what that outcome is, we don't know yet, but you know, it's certainly not our default first preference to go out there and slap a tax on everybody. We're always going to be looking for non-regulatory or incentive-based approaches to solve those problems.
All right. Well, thank you all very much.
Well, wait a minute. I still get my question. My big issue is agreement on the numbers, and the in-stream flow is also obviously the one we talk about most, and so there's got to be some way to reevaluate the in-stream flow. So if it's both sides or all sides or any sides, agree to the way in-stream flow is calculated. And the one that really brings question to my mind is quantity. We are not Yakima, we are not Southern California. We have rain most of the year. We're talking about a couple of months. Kate just discussed what they knew about the water where she was raised. Why don't we know it here? Why are we guessing all the time? We know how much oil's in the ground. We know how much everything. Why don't we know how much water's in the ground? Why don't we have a number? And I know it's probably expensive, but we spend a whole lot of time and money, on stuff that maybe doesn't get us anywhere. So why?
Before we take that on, in reference to our host then here, can I ask you to, someone give us that answer in 2 minutes or less, as we need to close down for the evening?
Yeah, Greg, I know from the WIRA, from the joint board's perspective, that's purely been a budget issue, right? We're coming out of 5 years of recessionary times, and as I talked about, there was money in the joint board budget to do the surface water budget, but there wasn't money to do the groundwater budget. And so we worked through that. We got the surface water analysis done. Now it's time for the groundwater, and so we're there. And it's taken slow. It's slow, and I know it takes time, and you know we're behind on things on that. But you know, it's a function of all the competition for scarce resources everywhere else in the county too.
Thank you very much. Well, this has been a most gratifying evening to have such a patient and courteous audience and asking such coaching questions. I hope that we've been able to get a few of those answered, unfortunately not for some folks. But I would say that if you look down on the bottom of the agenda, you'll see that there's a contact for Mr. Larry Helm and his phone number. Let me suggest that, you know, when you get home, you go, gee, many crickets, I had the question, I wish I could have asked it. It would be great, I'm sure that Larry would be very receptive, that please give him a call so he can note it, because there's going to be additional meetings like this so that we can get to the nub of the issues. But thank you all for coming out this evening. Thank our panel for all the time. This has been a great example of democracy in action. Thank you.